Europa Clipper is a NASA mission to a moon of Jupiter that might have life in its ice-covered ocean. And it's scheduled to launch in just a few days on October 10th, 2024. So what does this mission plan to accomplish? Do we think we might discover extraterrestrial life in our solar system? Hello, my name is Rachel, and I am currently one of GSA's Science Communication Fellows, which means that I'll be popping on here on the Geosociety channel a little bit more this year to share a lot of the work being published in their journals, the work being presented at their annual meeting, and that's what you're watching right now. I also have my own channel called GeoGirl, where I share a lot of geoscience content as well, so I will link that in the description box of this video if you're interested in checking it out. And with that, we'll get back to today's conversation. In this video, I got to sit down with a NASA scientist on the Europa Clipper mission team, Dr. Erin Leonard. So let's get into our discussion about the Clipper mission.
So we are here at GSA's annual GSA Connects 2024 meeting, where you have multiple presentations and projects going on.
Yes.
All about this cool moon Europa. And we just talked about your first one, or well, not first in chronological order, but one of those about Europa's geology over on my channel, GeoGirl. So that is the part one to this discussion. And now we're moving to part two. So if you haven't seen part one, where we talk about kind of what Europa is and its geology and how important that is, then go check out that. And now we're going to move on to part two, which is all about the upcoming Europa Clipper mission, which by the time this goes out, it's going to be like launching right now, which is so exciting. So in terms of Europa Clipper, there is a presentation going on here that is all about that mission, titled Europa Clipper, 2 weeks to launch, at least as of now.
Yes.
And you are a collaborator on that project and doing a lot of really interesting work with the Clipper mission. So can you just talk about your role on the Clipper mission first, and then we'll get into what it's all about?
Yes. So I'm a project staff scientist on Europa Clipper. And so what that means is essentially I work for the project science office, which kind of oversees all of the instruments and all of the instrument teams and gets everyone to come together and operate as a mission team, as a science team, synthesizing all of that science together and working together as a full team.
That's awesome. I did the NASA Planetary Science Summer School. It was so fun. And like the amount of different diverse experts in diverse fields that have to come together to make a mission. Like you wouldn't think that it would work, but it works so well. I mean, if it's a good team,
if it's a good team and
a good PI and like, you know, these team leaders. Like, what I loved about it is that, you know, everybody's like leading a specific part and it all just comes together so wonderfully to really make a valuable mission. Right?
And if it comes together that seamlessly, that's telling you that the project science office is doing its job, right? It's communicating between all the scientists, all the engineers, it's communicating all the scientists together. And so I feel like, you know, when you have a well-run mission, it almost gets forgotten. It's like, oh, well, you know, everything's just great and the team works together so great, but that's really in the background, the project science office getting it together.
Yeah, that's amazing. So before we jump into the mission, just for people that might not have seen part one, can you just give us, you know, some context surrounding what's Europa and why are we going there?
Yeah. So Europa, for those who might not know, is one of Jupiter's 4 major moons. It's actually the smallest of its major moons, but it's not very small and not too much smaller than the other moons. And it's about the size of Earth's moon. So, but Europa, instead of being made of rock like our moon, is made of an icy shell with a liquid water ocean underneath that we think is actually similar to our oceans here on Earth. And then it has a rocky core in the middle. And we think that Europa may have all the ingredients to support life. And that's why we want to go there and understand it.
So in the abstract for, you know, the Clipper mission talk, it's mentioned that Europa Clipper is a flyby mission rather than, you know, orbiter or lander. So what's the reasoning behind this? You know, why do we want to do a flyby instead of one of those other types?
We really have a flyby mission out of necessity. So Jupiter creates this really intense radiation environment around it. It's so massive. It has this massive dynamo. It has these really intense radiation belts. And so in order to have a reasonably sized spacecraft that doesn't just have shielding all over it, we are orbiting Jupiter. We're spending a lot of time far out from Jupiter, and then we kind of come in close and dive in and do a close flyby of Europa and then get out of that high radiation zone pretty fast. And so while it's not orbiting Europa, we do have 49 flybys of Europa, and what ends up happening is we generate this really cool web of flybys across Europa. So we're getting really good coverage. You know, it's definitely not as extensive as an orbited mission would be, but we can last a lot longer, so we can do a lot more flybys and really get that coverage that we want of Europa.
Yeah, I just recently talked to David Williams about the Psyche mission.
Yes.
And he was talking about how this mission is an orbiter, and I was like, how can they orbit such a tiny body, you know, and then Clipper has to be this flyby mission. Why can't we be an orbiter? But the Jupiter's radiation is just
Psyche's not in orbit around Jupiter, so
it's far away from Jupiter and safe from its harm.
Definitely.
How much shielding had to go into the spacecraft to protect it from
so primarily we have shielding around what we call the vault. It's called the vault so that it can protect all of these really critical electronics that run all the instruments, run different subsystems on the spacecraft. And I think that, you know, is centimeters thick of metal. So it's
I remember that
intense.
Being such a annoying part of designing like the IO mission.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It was like, you know, you have to do the shielding, but then that adds mass.
Then
you have to, you know, add more fuel, and then it's like then we have to take away instruments because too much mass, too expensive. It was so frustrating.
Right. So you have all these things to balance, right? Like you were saying, the mass. If you have more mass, you need more fuel. That increases the size of everything. Everything costs more, so you have to. And then maybe you would start stripping instruments away if it costs too much. And so you really have to balance all of these things. How many instruments you have, how much power you need, how much shielding you really need, and then how massive you can get your spacecraft so that we can still launch it, right? Because we have to have rockets to get it there too.
And it really speaks to the precision to which the science is planned for each mission. Like with David, we were talking about the objectives and how, you know, you just have to think of like, what are the absolute minimum science goals that you can have to make the mission like worth it at a certain cost and all of this. But this is a flagship mission.
This is a flagship mission.
And so just talk about what that means in terms of compared to other missions and kind of what that entails for Clipper.
Right. So a flagship mission is NASA's largest class planetary mission. And they're normally on the scale of billions of dollars, as opposed to some of its other missions, like a New Frontiers mission is on the scale of maybe up to $1 billion. The Discovery missions are about $500 million. And so these flagship missions, they're really made to go after those biggest questions. And it's kind of the mission of last resort, right? You don't want to be the most expensive mission, right? But you're really trying to go after these questions that require enough instrumentation to answer that science question that you cannot get at any other way. And that's really what we have with Clipper, right? So Europa Clipper is going to Europa to explore and understand whether it is a habitable environment. And to really address that question of habitability, you have to come at it from all angles, right? There is no, life detector that you can send to Europa. There's no habitability monitor that you can give it. You have to come at it from all angles, from a lot of different data sets, and really synthesize those together to understand its habitability. And that's why we have Europa Clipper.
That's so exciting. So what are the major science goals or objectives for Europa? Do we think that this mission could maybe detect life on Europa, or is it really more looking at just whether it's habitable?
Right. So first we really have to start with the question of whether it's habitable, right? Again, we don't have this magic life detection instrument that we can send somewhere. And so because of that, we first want to understand whether Europa is even potentially habitable before we send a whole mission trying to look for life there, right? And so Europa Clipper is the first step to understand whether Europa may have life on it, and that's to really investigate whether it's habitable. And so we do that through looking at 5 major themes of Europa science. So in order to investigate Europa's habitability, we're looking at the geology, which we talked about a lot, the interior, understanding the ice shell and the ocean, and even the rocky interior. the composition, so understanding how some of the material on the surface may have originated in the ocean, understanding what the composition of the ocean may be. That's an important one, right? And a very obvious one to understand whether the ocean might be habitable. We want to know what it's made of. And then also the activity. And so we can tell by looking at Europa's surface that it was active, at least in the recent geological past, at least in the past 100 million years. But is it active today? That we don't know. And so that's one of the big things we're going to look for with Clipper. And that is definitely affecting whether Europa may be habitable today or was habitable sometime in the past. And then, of course, we want to do reconnaissance. So like you were just saying, eventually, if we determine that Europa is habitable, we're going to want to send something there to see if we can detect life on Europa. And so we want to make sure Clipper sets us up for success on that path, make sure that we know, we scout out potential landing sites, know where the interesting ones are, know where the safe ones are for the potential next mission.
So that's, oh my gosh, I'm so excited now. But one thing that you said, well, we covered a lot on part one, the importance of geologic activity for Europa's potential habitability, and that the cycling of materials is so important for whether it might be habitable and be able to maintain life in its subsurface ocean. So go to part one for that if you haven't. But continuing on what you just said, like a future mission, do you think if, we go there and it really leans us toward, this is definitely potentially habitable and could have life in its subsurface ocean, would the next mission be like drilling down into the ocean? How would that work?
Yeah, potentially, right? I mean, so you can imagine a couple different options. Landing on the surface, digging down into ice shell to see if we can get at maybe microbes or something that are living in the ice shell. Again, if we determine that it's habitable. Or yes, there are concepts where you can melt through some of the ice shell. And so instead of drilling, you're sort of melting. But you're melting through the ice shell to get to the ocean to look for potential life. That's
so exciting. And this is a question that just popped in my head now, just because I know that I will get comments asking this. And I've, given my 2 cents on this on my channel before. But if we go to Europa and we're like, definitely probably habitable, could have life, what kinds of life would we be expecting?
Yes,
I've always assumed, microbial.
I do get this question a lot. It's like, okay, well, if Clipper goes to Europa, could it discover life? And it's like, okay, well, if there are giant squid sitting on the surface of Europa, yes, we could probably see them with Europa Clipper. But that's probably not the kind of life that we're talking about for Europa. Life in its most abundant form, even on Earth, is microbes and things that are down at the microscopic scale, right? So that's more along the lines of what we're expecting on Europa. And so, yes, you would have to go there. You would have to dig into the ice shell. You would have to get into the ocean to detect that life.
Well, and I also remember hearing a person give this analogy when it comes to like space exploration and looking for extraterrestrial life. It's like, if you came to Earth and like took a bucket of water out of the ocean and like you just didn't see anything, you would know that there's all this diversity of marine life out there. Obviously, you could find microbes, but like it just visually, and when we're talking about these flyby missions, not necessarily landers, obviously the remote sensing is such that it's hard to, there's no life detector.
There is no magic life detector, and so while we can get at whether there's organics or like there might be hints of even complex organics, we can get at that with some of even the in situ instrumentation on Europa Clipper. We're not going to have a magical life detector, which doesn't exist even for life as we know it.
Yeah, but getting back to the squid thing, I thought that a lot too. But it's so funny because I'll tell people like, but even if it was just microbes, that would be cool, and the implications that would have for like knowing that there's life out there that is not on Earth, but in our solar system. Do you think if we found that, do you think it's more likely it would be something that had a separate origin to that of life on Earth just because it's so far away? Or do we have any thoughts on that yet?
I think that's going to be a really big question if we find life somewhere else, particularly in our own solar system, right, where there is at least a chance of contamination between the different planetary bodies. I think it's going to take studying that life to really get to,
what's it made of?
What's it made of? We talk a lot about left-handed or right-handed molecules. And so, comparing it to life on Earth, comparative astrobiology, I think is really going to be the key to that, right? I think it could go either way.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about kind of the major science goals that Europa Clipper is going out there to try and achieve for this mission. What kind of data is Clipper going to collect, and what kind of instruments is on the spacecraft to answer these questions?
Yeah, mountains of data. It's going to be amazing. So we have 10 instruments on the Europa Clipper spacecraft. You can kind of divide them up into remote sensing, 5 remote sensing instruments, and 5 in situ instruments. So you can think of remote sensing instruments as like, oh, I'm looking at that thing over there, and it's over there, and I'm probably taking images or capturing data from it from a distance. The in situ instruments are really more interested in what's going on right around the spacecraft, or really collecting information from right around the spacecraft, right around its environment. Yeah. So for the 5 remote sensing instruments, we have MISE, which is the IR spectrometer, so the infrared spectrometer that's going to tell us a lot about Europa's composition, especially at the surface. We have the UVS, the UV spectrograph, which is going to tell us all about primarily also our plume detector. It would really be powerful in understanding whether Europa has plumes or plume deposits. ICE, which is the visible light camera, and it's actually really 2 instruments. It's a narrow angle camera and a wide angle camera. We have REASON, which is the ground penetrating, or ice penetrating radar, I should say. And that's really penetrating into Europa's ice shell to understand whether there might be interstitial pockets of liquid within Europa's ice shell, and even potentially at the full depth of the ice shell as well. Oh, and of course, eThemis. Can't forget eThemis. And that's our thermal imager. And that's, you can think of that almost like Predator, right? It's like heat seeking. It's looking for where those hot spots are on Europa's surface to understand maybe where it's currently active.
Wow, that's so exciting.
Those are just the remote sensing instruments. We have 5 more in situ instruments. So these are the ones that are looking at the environment right around the spacecraft. We have the mass specs, which is the mass spectrometer, and SUDA, the dust analyzer. And those are really collecting particles that are coming up off of Europa's surface and coming up towards the spacecraft. And also, if we happen to discover a plume and fly through it, those are going to be critical for understanding what's in the plume. Then we have ECM, which is the magnetometer, and PIMS, the Faraday cups. And those are really looking at Europa's magnetic and plasma environment. So Europa has this induced magnetic field. It doesn't have its own magnetic field. It doesn't produce its own magnetic field. It doesn't have a dynamo. But what happens is that Jupiter has such a massive magnetic field. And as Europa is orbiting Jupiter in this changing magnetic environment, Jupiter's changing magnetic environment, that actually induces a magnetic field in Europa because of that conductive subsurface ocean. That's one of the reasons we know that that subsurface ocean is salty and conductive. And so ECM and PIMS are going to tell us even more about that subsurface ocean and how it's producing this induced magnetic field. And then last but certainly not least, we have the gravity radio science instrument, which is going to tell us about Europa's ice shell thickness, about the ocean thickness, and about potential different gravity signatures.
Yeah, one thing that we kind of touched on gravity measurements in the Psyche video, and I'm curious, can you just give an explanation of how does measuring gravity around a body give us any information about densities of layers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So gravity is also just I think a unique sort of instrument. It's not, so we call it an investigation, actually, not an instrument, because it's really what it is using the high gain antenna, or using these antennas that we have to communicate to Earth as its science instrument. And so you can tell essentially how the spacecraft is moving very slightly off of where we think it should be due to Europa's gravity perturbing the spacecraft, right? So for Europa Clipper, what that's essentially telling us is, depending on how that spacecraft is being shifted as we fly by Europa, it's telling us things about like how the mass is distributed within Europa. So different densities can tell us about mass anomalies or mass deficiencies in certain locations. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a very powerful
technique. So that can kind of tell you not only like a global, maybe average ice thickness, but also kind of like variations as you go around. Wow,
yeah, absolutely. So cool. And those variations, you have to be careful too, because those could be variations due to the rocky interior too. So you have this ice shell that you have to think about, but you also have the rocky interior. So if there are mountains or
like make different models with different layer thicknesses to get what matches the data.
Right. Or you just have 49 flybys, and
there you go.
That's going to help you deconvolve all these different things, right? All these different signals.
Yeah, that's a lot of flybys. That's going to be so much data.
It's been great.
One thing I love that you said is that, if we happen to discover a plume, like, the mass spec and all the other, in situ
Mhm.
instruments are going to be really cool to fly into that and
Yeah.
collect data on that. I love that this mission, and like I didn't know that I thought they were so rigid, like there's no opportunistic science, if you will, but that's so cool that it's got the flexibility to be like, well, if there's that, we'll just, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And so while we have these 49 flybys in the prime mission, you know, if we see a plume, we don't happen to fly through the plume for those 49 flybys, that will definitely be the driver for an extended mission, right? Is to adjust the orbit so that we can fly through a plume. So, but I don't think we can adjust on the fly. You know, that would be a lot for for kind of reframing our science goals. I think that we always have the extended mission, or hopefully we would have an extended mission to go after some of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good there are so many flybys.
Yes.
Because the likelihood, if there are plumes, you know, there's a lot of flybys, so hopefully.
Hopefully, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the abstract, it also mentioned that there might be some collaborative, you know, science going on between Europa Clipper and the JUICE mission from ESA. Can you talk about anything that's planned with that and how that might work?
Yeah, so ESA's JUICE mission is actually going to be in the Jupiter system about the same time as the Clipper mission, which is really amazing. I mean, really thinking about having two spacecraft in the same system is going to be very powerful. JUICE, while it does flybys of all of the moons in the Jovian system, is going to get into orbit around Ganymede, so another one of Jupiter's major moons. And so while Clipper is mostly focused on Europa, JUICE does focus on the whole system, but is also mostly focused on Ganymede. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things that we can do with having two spacecraft in the system. And like I said, while JUICE will get into orbit around Ganymede, it does have some flybys of Europa. And it'll be really great to, like, at a minimum, to cross calibrate the instruments, right? So JUICE also has an ice penetrating radar called RIME. Europa has ice penetrating radar called REASON. And so comparing those two, yes, rhyme and reason, yes. Comparing those two data sets of the same body is going to be really great for calibrating those instruments together. And there are many examples of that. Their ice penetrating radar is just one, but it does have a lot of similar instruments that can be done also.
That's so exciting.
Besides calibration, though, I mean, there's Jupiter's magnetic field and the changing radiation environment. You know, having two data points in the system at all times is really going to help with untangling that mess of that crazy mess of the chaos of that dynamo, that magnetic field. Yeah,
we talk about chaos in the part one. That is an actual term for the material on Europa.
Yes, a geological term, but yeah.
So is there anything else going on with the mission that we haven't mentioned that you want to promote?
I mean, besides the fact that we're launching, like you said, you know, I think
timeline.
Yes,
what is
the timeline. Yes, yeah. So, you know, in the abstract, it says 2 weeks. We're now 16 days from our launch window opening on October 10th. And very excited. Everyone manifest good weather in Cape Canaveral on the 10th. It's very exciting. And it's an instantaneous launch window. So if we don't get off pretty much right away, then it'll wait till the next day. It's not like one of those launch windows where you have 3 hours to wait for the clouds to move it in the right way.
The next day, that's good though, because sometimes isn't it like, okay, you have to wait like 3 years now?
Oh yeah, no. So usually you have this like launch window. So ours runs from October 10th to, I believe, November 6th. So we have almost a month to launch the spacecraft, just in case you know, the weather decides to get in the way. But we're all manifesting good weather, so it's gonna go probably on the 10th, or I'm manifesting it at least.
And then how long is it going to take to get to Europa?
Right, yeah. So it takes about 5.5 years for the spacecraft to get to Europa and the Jupiter system. And that's because we're doing what we call a mega trajectory, a Mars-Earth gravity assist. So we go out, we go around Mars, we come back around Earth, and we slingshot out to Jupiter.
And that helps, like, you know, if we were just to go straight from Earth, that'd be like a lot of
fuel. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And we need the gravity like to kind of help us out there.
Yeah, definitely. So it takes a lot. It would take a lot of fuel to do a straight shot, not only to get there, but also to stop. Right. So you have to think about how you're going to stop when you get to Jupiter. You have to do what we call a massive burn of fuel to slow down once you get to Jupiter. And so even with this Mars-Earth gravity assist, we still do I think it's a 6-hour burn when we arrive in the Jupiter system to slow down. And so it's it's a lot of fuel already.
Yeah, I remember that being a discussion when we were designing the Io mission. Like, you know, it would be not only is the radiation environment so harsh around Jupiter, but if you try to do like an orbiter, you have to like use so much fuel to stay in orbit around this tiny body because the gravitational pull of Jupiter is so huge.
Trying to pull you out. Yeah.
So there's a lot of fuel involved just to try and get next to these tiny bodies when you're right next to a huge body.
Yeah, definitely.
That is so cool. Is there anything else?
I don't think so. Yeah, come follow along. You can watch the launch live on NASA TV. On
I will
NASA
link
Plus.
everything.
Yeah, link it all. Follow along with Europa Clipper. You know, europa.nasa.gov. I think it's going to be a spectacular mission, and we love to have everyone along for the ride.
Yeah, what I love is like the Psyche mission, and I'm sure they'll do this with Clipper too, is NASA has these like web pages where you can like see the spacecraft live.
Yeah.
Like where it's at and like, you know, where it's going and how its trajectory is going to work. And you can like move it around and follow along for those 5 years that we have to wait.
Yeah. But it'll be worth the wait.
Absolutely. This is so exciting. Thank you so much for coming on. I think everybody is going to be super excited about this one and all going to be watching the launch.
Great. Thanks for having me, Rachel.
So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about the Clipper mission. All those links will be in the description box below for you to follow along and check out other resources linked to this mission. And with that, be sure to check out the part 1 of this video where we talk about Europa's geology and the implications it has for life on that moon. That I will link up on the screen somewhere. It is on my channel, GeoGirl, so check that out. And with that, thank you again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.